Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. When the Islamic Republic of Iran set out to expand its reach throughout the Middle East, its ambition was to have it both ways, as cost-free as possible. Tehran developed a wide network of proxies to do its work for it, but also to pay in their own blood and livelihood should the intended victims resist the aggression. This plot has now been put to the test in the year-long war between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, namely Ansar Allah, and other pro-Iranian forces, with Iran itself finally coming out of the shadows and joining the fray. To take stock of Iran's belligerent strategy, its prices and benefits, here in our panel, all the way from the United States, Professor Russell Berman, formerly a senior advisor at the State Department's Foreign Planning Staff, currently, of course, the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Project at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. It's always a pleasure to have you, Russell.
Good to see you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure indeed. Also joining us here in Israel, Central Israel to be exact, is Colonel in Reserve Miri, formerly the ICT's director, currently a senior fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, formerly, of course, an advisor at the Prime Minister's office, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's a pleasure having you, Miri.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure with us here in the studio, of course, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
Alliances are never neat. Even if there is one major partner and the others are subsidiary, the others follow the lead of this major partner, nevertheless, they have their own interests. And this is why Iran wanted to have a long-term strategy, didn't want Hezbollah or Hamas or anyone else to try and dictate to it the timing. They wanted to be able to reach out for their nuclear project and only then have the others follow suit by flanking Israel or other Western outposts as they see it in the Middle East. So first, Hezbollah, 18 years ago in 2006, did its own bidding when it started a conflict with Israel, which Iran did not want. It was premature for it. And then a year ago, even though in general Iran was and still is supportive of Hamas, again, Yahya Sinwar did not consider what Iran wants to do. He went ahead and did it, expecting Iran to support him nevertheless. If the powers that be in Tehran are looking back a year or 13 months, they must be very disappointed because now they are bracing for an Israeli counterattack, which they know is coming, but they don't know how to prepare for it. Their two main proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, have been decimated, and they don't know what will happen in the United States following the elections.
Indeed, of course, to mention their success in Iraq, where they are doubling down on their capacity to assert influence via Hashd al-Sha'bi in Damascus. Their continued success in Yemen, when they're...
The success in Iraq is in the Iraqi government asking the U.S. to leave, to fold...
Well, it's not necessarily leave.
Yeah, so...
There are nuances here since they asked to terminate Operation Inherent Resolve and to reestablish a bilateral relationship. We need to wait and see, but it is diminishing the number of troops in Iraq proper.
You could see when the drone hit Netanyahu's residence, the Iranians immediately said, it's not us. And then a few days later, Hezbollah said, yes, it's us, it's not them. Don't hit them. We did it.
Right. So yeah, within that mix, of course, also to remember that Ansar Allah continues to disrupt freedom of maritime navigation in the Red Sea, the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways. We still see an expansionism into the Horn of Africa, particularly into Somalia, and playing a role there quite effectively, and also increasing their influence in Syria, despite the concerns voiced by Moscow, which is not necessarily aligned with Tehran in Syria. It still manages to play that game on the various fronts. Nonetheless, in order to better clarify to our viewers the current state of play, Professor Berman, the last time you visited Jerusalem, we had the pleasure of recording a couple of panels together, during the course of which we highlighted, of course, Iran's strategy within the context of 12er Shiite Islam, their religious aspects and aspirations, as well as their military and the efforts to export the revolution, so-called. How could you characterize it at this point in time with all that played out since then to date?
Well, Jonathan, a few years ago, we would often talk about Iran and its malign activities throughout the region, pointing to Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., as direct appendages, really, of Iranian foreign policy. I don't think that's wrong, but we should clarify the nature of that relationship. The relationship between Tehran and its various proxies is not it's not the same as, say, the operations of the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War, when the decision makers in Moscow could tell Warsaw, Budapest, etc., what to do next. There was not a lot of daylight between the East European satellite states and the policy goals of Moscow. Now, what we have seen is that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the others do have degrees of latitude that the Poles or the Czechs or the Hungarians didn't have during the Warsaw Pact. What we don't know, though, however, and following up on the exchange just a moment ago, was Sinwar's decision, was Sinwar's unproductive decision to launch the October 7th attack, an extreme case within within Iran's network? Could Hezbollah, could the Houthis act with that degree of independence from Tehran that Sinwar did, or are the other ones more or less in line with Iranian goals, and Sinwar was an outlier? Add to that a diachronic element of the analysis, that is to say, okay, Sinwar made, from the Iranian point of view, a big mistake in launching this war, which has led to the devastation of Hamas and Hezbollah and threatened the Iranian homeland. Will Iran now try to exercise tighter control of its proxies than it did before October 7th? We'll have to see.
Indeed. Let's not forget that the two key foreign policies, as articulated by the Ayatollah regime for Iran, include: one, to remove the American hegemonism, as they put it, from the region, and secondly, to deepen their influence or friendly relations, neighborly relations, as they define it. But naturally, there is no country where their influence does not touch, that doesn't crumble and reach an all-time low from Lebanon through Syria to Iraq to Yemen. And therefore, there are various aspects of this that needs to be taken into account. But nonetheless, Colonel Eisen, when we look at the broad scheme of things, the Iranians do not shy away from dictating to a number of their proxies what they would like. Of course, as Professor Berman correctly stated, they do not have as much influence on certain proxies in if we take, at least within this context, Hamas and Hezbollah. Naturally, they currently have an RGC commander dictating to Hezbollah how to operate, as opposed to Hamas, which they do not have somebody on the ground advising them on every turn.
So I'm listening to the discussion, and I'm going to gently try and bring in an additional, perhaps different element, because I think that the Islamic regime of Iran, certainly the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps within that, over the last year has not only invested in arming the proxies and backing the proxies, and maybe they did not initiate the October 7th attack, But on October 7th, not a day later, they stepped in the information warfare. And of all the different things that we've not mentioned until now, because Israel's successes, both against Hamas's heinous attack, and in the time that it took us, and in what we're doing against Hamas there, and what we're doing physically, militarily, preempting against another October 7 type attack of Hezbollah, for that matter. Or in that sense, everything that you've mentioned until now, the Houthis firing at us and us attacking in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, and the different proxies. For a moment, I want to talk about the information warfare, because in this case, the Islamic regime of Iran is directly involved and is part of the direct amplification of those voices that have come out in such a negative way worldwide. And I'll remind everybody that not only do they support the Houthis, the Shiites, and they are, in that sense, they are the voice, they are the ideology. They also are vehemently anti-Semitic. The Islamic regime of Iran hosts the annual Holocaust denial conference, in that sense, in that arena of the words, of what they send out, of how they present what's been going on in the last year. I sadly feel that the biggest impact of what Iran can do by sending it out from there, because at the end it's a country and it's 90 million strong, and in that sense what it sends out in the I don't want to say internet waves, but in the social media world, has absolutely had an absolute negative impact for Israel over the last year. And that means that right now, the school year has started in U.S. campuses, and not only there. And when you see that support for Hamas or for Hezbollah on a U.S. campus, and you see the voices that come out there, in this case, Jonathan, I directly connect that back to the capabilities that you have when you are a state, a country that has a very strong media, social media capability. And that's something that the social media platforms themselves have proven, that on the social media platforms, those capabilities between what we call bots and making the information go out more and sidelining the whole conversation, that's been a direct involvement of the Islamic regime of Iran from October 7th, 2023. And I say very sadly, again, to me, it's their biggest success and the one that we need to call out, because we are handling as we can, because we can't, we're trying and we're handling the challenging terror armies. But what do we do about the terror boats?
Indeed. Well, I must say, with regard to a couple of things. The first one, the information war. I don't think that Iran is standing here alone. I think that the key backers of the Islamist Hamas, be it Qatar and Doha or Turkey, Ankara, have been as active as Iran in controlling the narrative in the Americas, and therefore they do bear the same responsibility when we're talking about the activities which the Iranians are pushing for. Of course, Iran stepped over the bounds and also operates its own agents within the U.S. government. We do see this with the leak, with, of course, a very significant leak of the U.S. basically spying upon Israeli preparations that have been then taken and made public on an Iran-linked Telegram channel, which speaks volumes for itself. We have a U.S. Special Envoy for Iran who is currently still under investigation for his various activities, handling or mishandling secretive documents. And within all of that context, we also need to remember that one of the reasons that Hamas launched its October 7th massacre was a reaction to the various activities Israel was conducting in order to root out the Islamist Hamas, which was receiving both funds as well as munitions and arms from the Islamic Republic of Iran via various smuggling routes from Syria into Jordan, into the so-called West Bank, Judea, with focus, of course, on the northern Samaria region, something that, of course, triggered various activities over that period of time, including, of course, known preparations of Hezbollah to launch a similar attack, which Israel was preparing for.
Yes, but it's contradictory, because while Israel was indeed fighting the Hamas-inspired terror coming out of Judea and Samaria, it still pampered Sinwar and his colleagues by Qatari money because it wanted Hamas to serve as a counterbalance to the Palestinian Authority. That's a whole different...
Right, but war is merely one tool of politics, and there are multiple tools here to be utilized in different arenas.
Yes, but what the government policy was, under both Netanyahu as well as Bennett, was to have no concessions to Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, and therefore within the Palestinian community to bolster Hamas, not because Israel liked Hamas, of course not, but because it wanted Hamas to become a strong adversary for Fatah. But let me make one comment regarding what we talked about and then a short one on another
Please.
topic. You know the old saying in Arab tradition, me, my brother, and my cousin against my neighbor, me and my brother against my cousin, our cousin, and sometimes me against my brother. It's all very conditional. It depends on the circumstances. So there are cleavages between Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah. The other point is that recently, in recent days and weeks, Israel has exposed at least 3 networks, one of only 2, a couple, someone and his girlfriend, and 2 networks of 7 operatives each, which Iran has employed in order to spy on Israeli assets, Israeli officials. There is a lot of activity on the espionage front.
Indeed. Well, we have established, give or take, the various activities undertaken by Iran, including operational, tactical, and strategic. How do we counter it? Professor Berman, we'll start with you. Is this a requirement, or should there be a requirement to counterbalance the Iranian, or to push back on the Iranian strategy by deepening American hegemonism, quote unquote, into the region by basically bolstering the Abraham Accords, which brought about much peace and prosperity to the region for a very brief yet prosperous time?
The logic for the Abraham Accords continue. The logic for Israel's integration with many of its neighbors on economic and diplomatic and cultural terms remains, and I am confident that this will happen despite the current war. What is remarkable is that given the scope of violence in Gaza, and even accepting the Hamas figures about the numbers of casualties, the response from the so-called moderate Sunni states has been effectively nothing. The Arab world is not rallying around Gaza and Hamas and Hezbollah. The Arab world, that is Riyadh, wants this to end, wants this to go away in order to proceed with the Abraham Accords. Now, to respond to your question directly, should Israel, should the United States, and those are 2 separate questions, counterbalance Iran? No, we should defeat Iran. And one of the problems with the vocabulary of the Western leadership, I'll exclude Israel here and talk about the United States, but it applies to much of Western Europe as well, is that the notion of victory has dropped out of the vocabulary of our political leadership. The notion of defeating Iran has disappeared, and I think that is ultimately what's going to be needed, given the DNA of the Islamic Republic, to oppose the influence, the interest, the hegemonism, if you will. I'm not sure what that means, of the United States to pursue an anti-Semitic strategy. This has to be defeated. Now, so far from the distance of California, it seems that with conceding that many tactical errors may have made, the Israeli leadership is proceeding methodically and dismantling the power of the proximate proxies, of the near enemy, if I can put it that way, of Hamas and Hezbollah. And now that we have seen Iran attempt and at times succeed in attacking core Israel, indeed the residents of Netanyahu, it will soon be time for Israel to respond in kind. If Iran, directly or through its proxies, is attacking the home of the leader of the state, I think a proportionate response is to do the same in Tehran. Now we'll see what the IDF leadership decides. There may be more productive targets in Iran, but slowly but surely, this nightmare for the world is going to be ended.
Absolutely, though. I think when we're talking about the American hegemonism, what they mean is wherever the Americans are, Iran is not, and therefore they want to push America out to be able to flood themselves throughout the region, and they view the state of Israel as a forward extension of the United States of America. Don't forget that they don't only call for the destruction of America and Israel, but also the United Kingdom. They always highlight England, Ingilis, how they say it in Persian, and they refer to the entire West, but ultimately they're talking about the big Satan, the small Satan, the United States, and the state of Israel. Colonel Eisen, your take.
When I'm listening to what we could or should do, I am very much together with Professor Berman in the fact that the Islamic revolution, the Islamic regime in Iran should not be something that Israel has to defeat. It's something that the world should defeat. It is bad news and has been for so many years. And I feel that the way that the world looks at it is that it's a legitimate country, and being a legitimate country, the hands are tied, and there are very specific ways they can go about, like specifically on the issue of the nuclear, as opposed to being the destabilizing export of terrorism, not just to the Middle East, but to Central and South America, to most of Asia. It's as if, that's other people's problems. And in its own way, what I'm very wary of right now is the way that this entire last year, when it has to do with what you started from the beginning, Jonathan, which is that Iran is behind the backer, the ideology, the supplier of weapons, and as I said, also the information warfare, to just bring that out, that all of that has come together as being, it's about Israel. And I absolutely think that everything that has to do with the Islamic regime of Iran should be the world against it. The moderate Sunni world, that would be one aspect. The European world, the UK that you mentioned, the United States, that everybody should be on board, because this is something that threatens everybody. And I think that what I'm worried about right now is that the world in its own way has become much more bipolar. I don't know if that's the right term for yet, but it's becoming more that Iran has found allies. And that is not something that they had, I would say, a year and a half ago. And that really disturbs me. Not just in their supplying weapons, but being an ally with Russia, not just supplying oil, but China coming out in this war, much more on that side than on this side. And these are issues that we need to take note, that it's not just about, when we say that Iran is against the U.S. strength inside the greater Middle East, that Russia and China, let alone Iran, want to also step in, and that makes it even more challenging. And as I said, we should be standing up and saying it clearly.
I think it goes beyond the Middle East. I remember quite vividly a day before the October 7th massacre, on October 6th, my friend at CNN, Oren Lieberman, published a report from the Pentagon saying that the United States has now accepted the fact that a coup occurred in Niger. Who were the two main culprits? Iran and Russia. Nobody even realized to pick up on that, because the next day, October 7th occurred, and that was a done story. So ultimately, Iran, Russia, China, obviously additional actors within this axis, are quite active. We're drawing near to the end of the program. Each one will receive roughly 45 seconds as a closing statement. Mr. Owen, we'll start with you.
20 seconds.
Go ahead.
I yield the rest. Some creatures in nature thrive in darkness, and when a searchlight is focused on them, they don't behave that way because they fear for their survival. This is what happened to Iran over the last year.
Professor Berman?
So reference was made to what's going on U.S. campuses, and there's no doubt a big anti-Semitic and anti-Israel component of it. But listening to what the demonstrators are saying on U.S. campuses, there's an enormous anti-American component. And where the problem that the United States is facing is that our elite universities are incubating the future traitors of tomorrow.
Alarming indeed. Colonel Eisen?
Here I am sitting in Israel, a democracy with warts and pimples. And I think that we need to be looking around and saying, where is democracy going right now? Why are we not bringing out the people who are thinking about this, about freedoms and liberties, and not just about, in that sense, everybody sidelining the Israeli, the Jew, the anti-Semitic? I really do think that we are at the edge of something much broader, and that Israel is at the forefront of it and should not have to have the brunt of it.
But having said all of that, all four of us, it behooves the Iranian people to work for regime change. It will not come from the outside. If they don't like what they have right now, they should rise and do something about it.
Indeed, and on that point exactly, Colonel Eisen mentioned this earlier, of course, that Iran is regarded by all as a legitimate state. Unfortunately, it is a legitimate state, but it's not a legitimate regime. Of course, the Islamic Revolution of 1979, that didn't start as an Islamic revolution, but rather was a protest movement by the middle class, brought about a regime change by a tyrannical, radical group of individuals who sought to foment and are doing so proactively as we speak. Of course, at the time, it was an imperfect monarchy. Nonetheless, everybody would want to see Iran reinvigorated to a new reality where it can become a good standing member of the international community. But with that, I'd like to immediately thank Colonel Eisen, Professor Berman, and Mr. Oren, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.